Hey everyone, so in this video I'm not going to write everything out. This is the one that was previously done for first period, so you don't have to watch it unless you missed the notes on Wednesday. But I asked class to just name an animal. They came up with sea otter, and then I wanted to cover what the definition of a habitat is. So in this case we discussed that a habitat for a sea otter is the ocean, but more than that, it's specific to near the shore, at the surface of the water, and in the Arctic or the subarctic area. We also discussed what a keystone species is and reviewed food webs. So in this food web, it shows the energy flowing through different organisms like kelp and sea urchins, and here's our little sea otter, and here's like an orca or a shark or something. We determined that these three, the zooplankton, the phytoplankton, and the otters are keystone species, meaning that if you take that keystone out, the whole thing kind of comes tumbling down. I will note here, though, that these are these plankton species. Sometimes there's many different species of plankton, and so if a single species is removed, it won't be too catastrophic. Whereas if you had removed the sea otters, it can be, catastrophic for everything above it, but it can also mess with things below it. For example, if the sea otter is removed, the sea urchin population will go way up, and that'll actually wipe out a lot of the big kelp forests. So the sea otters are critical for the kelp forests, which provide habitat for fish and stuff like that. I thought it also pertinent to review kind of some of these levels of organization that we have in biology. So we talked about what a species are, but that should be self-explanatory. A population is just a group of individuals of a certain species in a certain area. And then a community is a group of individuals, but they don't have to be the same species. So in this case, the community of plankton in a certain area of the ocean or something like that. Then finally we go up to a biome. We talked about different types of biomes, whether or not that is desert or the Arctic tundra or decidual forests, something like that. Ecosystem. Here I pointed out that there are two things in an ecosystem. There's the biotic and abiotic factors. And then we jumped into a specific example. Out of myself. The aquatic biome. So in the aquatic biome, I had people come up with some of the abiotic factors. So things like the temperature of the water, the amount of sunlight getting through, the amount of salt and dissolved nutrients, the volume of water may change, the flow rate may change. These are some of the abiotic factors. You can probably think of others. And then we had a couple of specific definitions to the aquatic biome. Near the shore, that's the littoral zone. And then we have a lot that have to do with depth. At the surface of the water, that's limnetic, and deep water is called benthic. And then there's two other terms, and these don't relate to just being near the surface. This relates to how far sunlight can penetrate. So really, all of the limnetic zone and the top part of the benthic zone here is called the photic zone because light is able to penetrate that water. Really deep lakes and the ocean, most of the volume is actually in the aphotic zone where light does not penetrate. Interestingly enough. So no photosynthesis can occur here. Energy comes either from organisms up top or from weird things like deep sea vents. We also touched on other aquatic style biomes such as rivers and streams. Here, like if it's a small stream, there is no benthic zone. It would just be constantly churning. Very different environment than a really large, slow-moving river. We also touched on swamps and salt marshes, and as well as estuaries. Okay, in this section, we talked about forest succession. So here in Alaska, we live in a temperate forest. often referred to as taiga, or like a near Arctic forest, referred to as the taiga. And we start here with a forest fire. And the forest fire, it burns really hot. It kills everything. Big animals can get away. But it doesn't kill the soil. Underneath the soil here, things actually remain pretty calm and happy. They're changed for sure, but they aren't all incinerated to death. So that means even though it might be charred up top, down below there's still a layer of soil. There's still live microorganisms and stuff there. Within sometimes even days or weeks, you start getting grasses to grow. Things like fireweed are always present the spring or summer after a fire. And then within a year or two, you start getting larger grasses and bushes, things like willows here in Alaska. Within a few years, you start getting birch trees. So, 5 to 10 years, these birch trees will start springing up. These grow fairly quickly. And then, of course, by the time they're shading the ground, they kind of reduce the ability for some of these other organisms to survive. So then other species might move in that can survive under a birch tree. And then in Fairbanks area, the climax community is the evergreen trees, or in this case, like white spruce or black spruce, depending on how much moisture is around. And this would be considered the climax community. Overall, this is secondary succession because the soil is still present. So fire here is referred to as a secondary disturbance. If you went and just bulldozed a bare plot of land, that would also be just a secondary disturbance. As long as there's soil, it's considered secondary. Primary disturbances are ones that cause primary succession, and they remove everything, down to bare rock. Or in the case of like a volcano erupting, it would just create bare rock, and then life would have to start building soil on that. You'd begin with lichens and bacteria and fungi and stuff like that, and then eventually there'd be enough debris and the rocks would break down, and you'd start to build soil on top of that. The other example is glaciers. As a glacier recedes, it leaves behind bare rock. The final thing we touched on was the difference between a threatened, endangered, and extinct. Extinct, obviously, like the dodo bird here, just means it's not around anymore, it's never coming back. Endangered means it's endangered of becoming extinct, and threatened is kind of a not quite to that level. So sometimes these species have extra protections. Sometimes they can still be hunted or killed incidentally for really specific purposes. But for the most part, if things become threatened or endangered, like hunting on them is often stopped. Their habitats are sometimes protected, that sort of thing. The final note is that species can be endangered in one place, but then not endangered in another, or not threatened in another, or they can just be functionally gone in one place and not threatened or endangered in another place. So, for example, in Alaska, we have bald eagles, and we've always had lots of bald eagles, but in the lower 48, they've been endangered, and since then they've come back a little bit, and they're more toward threatened. But that's just one example.